Okay, welcome back. Late March 1854, and this is, well, back to business as usual, right? Our first quarterly report of the year, just a kind of business report really to look at economic development and any other developments that have happened in the past quarter. So we've kind of got our troop deployments approximately kind of where they were really before the beginning of the Crimean War. So we have a rapid reaction force under the command of Hussein Avni Pasha. He's one of the more effective officers we have, and a bit like Omar Pasha, he's someone that we kind of have an eye on as a prospect for promotion. He'd be really, really good, and yeah, having him kind of stationed in Sofia so he can move quite quickly in any direction would be a good shout. We've got Riza Pasha's kind of mixed command, which was kind of really the sort of detritus of what was left at the end of the war, suitably commanded by Riza Pasha, I should say. Kind of mixed forces, really. We've got what was kind of built at Smyrna, also kind of joining his command. Will be there in 10 days. And the purpose really is just to keep them inside Constantinople. We might look at kind of just ever so slightly scaling down the size of the army. Now, we do ultimately want to build an entirely sort of separate command, a new command, but it makes sense actually to kind of dissolve the militia forces and just rebuild infantry. My phone again, apologies, let's turn that on silent. And yeah, just focus on building regular infantry divisions. That said, we could keep the militia division inside the city, and they will gradually become infantry divisions anyway. Omar Pasha's force is inside Adrianople for the time being. His force is largely intact. In the event of any kind of outbreak of a major conflict, Hussein Avni will head towards Omar Pasha and basically fold into his force, and will probably give the Imperial Guard to Hussein Avni as one of the more capable commanders. In terms of economic recovery in the Balkan Peninsula, it's gradual. You know, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not just going to take 3 months. You know, Russian armies, I mean, besieging. Funny enough, the areas that were most damage, like for example Plevna, has recovered quite quickly, but other areas like Salonika, the kind of gap at Zvornik, Constanta, these areas will take a bit of time to recover. And also, incidentally, the area surrounding Constantinople, there was a kind of, I don't know if you remember, a pretty bitter, small, kind of almost guerrilla war that was fought outside the city of Constantinople, where a Russian garrison force was pretty set on on sort of ensuring it was going to disrupt the movement of supplies and so on and so forth, and this apparently caused some damage to the province. There's also, yeah, again, I mean, the same is the case slightly in the east. In the east, the only area that suffered due to any kind of pillaging, or at least the last area that was Malatia. Our second army, then, or our eastern army under Abdul Karim Nadir, is inside the fortress at Erzurum. We're going to keep that force there for the foreseeable, and hopefully over a period of time these militia corps will gradually kind of convert into regular infantry corps. It may take some time, but that's something that we do kind of we want to happen, and we're going to keep them inside the fortress to that end. It's a slightly faster process, I believe, if we do that. The revolt then at Basra was effectively suppressed. It took a couple of rounds of combat. The infantry division at Baghdad has been relocated back to Baghdad. We have noticed, this is a very recent development, I think it was in late Feb, we noticed that Aqaba, that there was an issue with regard to military control here. We can't see anything, but we know that insurgents are active, just kind of south of Palestine, east of Sinai. So to that end, we have landed an infantry division. This was a new infantry division that was formed at Smyrna just towards the end of the war. We've relocated these boys to Palestine for the time being, to Judea. They're going to hold there, get some organisation sorted out, get themselves in better shape, because of course they've just disembarked, and once they're in a good position to, they will move to Aqaba. The revolt at Misurata was effectively suppressed. Same kind of story as Iraq, really. No major issues. It took a couple of rounds of combat. Very, very few losses. We suffered a couple of hundred casualties. That division has moved back to Tripoli, and military control has been restored. Military order has been restored to Tripolitania. Now, in Aden, we sent a commander. We just kind of went a little bit of a random thing, really. We thought, well, Ismail Pasha is a relatively new commander. He's a 2-star general. He's not got terrible stats, not got great stats, but we thought we don't really need anyone that's really, really excellent. We'll send him to basically run the show in Aden, and that's where he is. He's in Aden. He's took over the cavalry division. That cavalry division, of course, hooked up with a supply convoy we sent south from Sana'a through enemy territory. It made it there safe. resolved the supply issues with that division, and that division is now moving north into Taiz. That division is going to hook up in 12 days' time with the Marines and the irregulars. One of the irregular brigades has actually now been trained up to be a regular as opposed to irregular, so it's a slightly better quality force. So that force is kind of gradually becoming professionalized, even though it was formed as a kind of like a militia brigade. So that's good news for us. And once these forces are combined, we're hoping that the leadership qualities of Ismail Pasha will give us the kind of combat value we need, the punch we need to take on these Yemeni forces in Hodeidah. And the idea is to try and close the gap at Taiz, move on the Yemenis at Hodeidah, and see what we can kind of pull off. It will take a bit of time, I think, for these kind of boys to get their organisation up, their cohesion, and prepare for operations against the Yemenis at Hodeidah. So we'll keep an eye on that, but that's a kind of a working plan, really. The other development, and this has just happened in late March, is we have a revolt in Epirus. I've not even read this. Let's have a look. In the province of Epirus, many Epirot Greeks revolted against the Ottoman rule with tacit support of the Greek state. A force of irregulars captured the provincial capital, Arta. The revolt also spread to most of the mountainous regions of Epirus, and a number of towns soon came under the control of the revolutionaries. A number of Greek officers resigned from their posts in the Greek army and joined the rebellion. Well, that is obviously something that we absolutely need to stamp on. That is not a small force. It's not an insubstantial force. I don't think that Hussein Avni's cavalry division alone is going to kind of cut the mustard really there. So to that end, let's have a look at what we can do. I think what we'll do is we're going to break off the Imperial Guard. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll break off the Imperial Guard under Salim Pasha. And how long is it going to take these boys to march? That's not too bad, actually. Not as bad as I would have thought. "17 days, force march, 75% chance." Okay, we'll go with a force march. That will disorganise the Imperial Guard a bit. There's a really good probability that will come off. And yeah, with the Imperial Guard plus Hussein Avni's cavalry division combined at Larissa or Thessalia, that should be enough, I think, to kind of seal the deal. Now, the revolutionaries have not yet actually managed to capture the town, Janina, in Epirus, because it is controlled by a small force of Bashi Bazouks. So it's a very small force. I don't think those guys are going to hold out for long, but we'll set them on hold at all costs. There's still a French force, of course, sitting in Salonika. That'll be kind of gradually pulled out, I suppose. Maybe piece by piece. It has reduced in size fairly significantly. So that's a military event that we're going to have to respond to. Those guys should be there by early April. We'll see what their organisation, their status is once they're there. I mean, if it takes Salim 11 days, he's still got 6-7 days to recover after that. So that's good enough for government work. That might be kind of good. That should give him the organisation and cohesion necessary to make a move into Epirus. The British, unfortunately, did turn down our overtures for an alliance. So in the event of a war, it's looking like we're going to be on our own for the foreseeable future. We'll wait until we've got enough kind of diplomats, and we'll maybe look to kind of maybe look at something. We've got a kind of commercial agreements with Britain and France, but we'll try and make another kind of push for a defensive alliance with Britain at a later date. It took us a few attempts to kind of encourage them to consider a commercial agreement, and that commercial agreement is paying off, incidentally. We'll have a look at kind of economic affairs in just a moment. Now, during the war, I didn't report any kind of great detail on economic developments or anything like that. There was no real prospect of us being kind of attritioned out of the war or anything like that in the kind of mid-19th century. I mean, it can happen. It happens sort of to the Confederacy a little bit, but we didn't suffer cataclysmically heavy losses. If you look at the battles, they were generally fairly ordered affairs. And if we have a look at, for example, our overall military casualties in the game are sitting at 654,000. And why is Salonika registered as kind of being under rebel control? We'll have to revisit that. But yeah, probably 40,000 of those was during the Aden conflict. So overwhelmingly these were during the Crimean War, but it's spread over nearly 2 years, 300,000 casualties a year. We kind of made sure at the beginning of the war that we had a sufficient replacement kind of pool, inventory really, to kind of ensure that our losses could be replaced, and that really paid off. We never really had any kind of issues with replacements. I mean, the Ottoman Empire, with control of obviously Anatolia, the Middle East, the southern Balkan Peninsula, is a relatively populous country. And bear in mind as well that armies during this period don't require a huge amount of furnishing. They're just infantry armies, so they require really just clothing and a weapon. And in most cases, they have very kind of elementary training. So it's not like a kind of 20th century war where economic muscle is much, much more significant because you have to furnish your army with heavy weapons and tanks, vehicles, machines, and this sort of thing. I mean, it still can happen. But the Russian economy also is very backward. I mean, it's very large, but it's very, very backward. It's, the real kind of case of combined and uneven development. You've got some development in St. Petersburg and Moscow, but other than that, it's a very kind of rural economy. During the war, we had no kind of major liquidity issues with regard to our capitalists. One of the curious features of the war is that we didn't really have any kind of major maritime issues, despite my insistence in flavor videos of depicting naval combat, because I'd rather like to imagine myself as a kind of maritime enthusiast. In reality, there were no significant naval engagements, and that was a surprise. The Russian Black Sea Fleet is no small thing, but we never really kind of saw it, we never engaged it, we never had any kind of big engagements with Russian combat ships. We effectively raided the central Mediterranean, but yeah, we never had any kind of major issues. The Russians never attempted to raid our merchant fleet, so we were able to kind of export our goods. The really populous, densely populated part of kind of Western Anatolia, which is, I would presume, where most of our kind of national market sales happen, in places like Constantinople, Smyrna, and also the other cities like sort of Sinop and this kind of thing. They were not significantly interrupted. Really, the only interruption happened during the kind of a small period of kind of like small-scale guerrilla warfare that the Russians conducted just outside the capital, really, and it took us a bit of time to zero in on that force. So there was not much to do in terms of really reporting on economic development. I mean, during the war, we were able to actually lay quite a lot of industrial plant. We had enough liquidity to do that. We were able to export goods to Britain, to France, to other kind of countries. We had no massive kind of economic disruption in terms of commerce. One thing that we did notice is the war, of course, did suppress domestic consumption a little bit, particularly because of the chaos and the kind of damage caused to the kind of local economy, really, in the Balkan. In the Balkans. One of the things we should note is that Bosnia-Herzegovina is not actually a part of the national economy. This has a highly localized economy. That's something that we can deal with, actually, at some point soon. We can maybe put a kind of collection center in Sarajevo. But one thing that I didn't do, for example, in April last year, is I didn't record any kind of economic data, which I typically do in April every year. The reason being is because the war, I think when I looked at the economic kind of data, it was really clear that the war had kind of was distorting the figures so much that they wouldn't really be of very much use, really. In order to kind of to function as an indication of economic growth, it would have looked like the economy had contracted significantly. That's not the case, because we know that vast amounts of industrial plant was being laid. As such, really kind of economic growth will become much clearer this year, next year, and the next few years. Of course, this year will still be slightly depressed because there is some damage to the Balkan Peninsula. That will naturally recover. Business will return to kind of normal, But yeah, in terms of the economy, let's have a quick look at Constantinople. I mean, both our manufactured goods shops have now been completed. We've still got two kind of military factories in construction, a military gear factory and an ammunition shop. And that is combined, of course, with an arms shop in Smyrna, an arms shop, and we have an additional manufactured goods shop. The basis for these kind of three military manufactories is, we are functioning. We have an army of a modern industrial state, but we don't have the things that every single other modern industrial state has, which is basically a kind of domestic arms industry. I think even Piedmont, Sardinia probably has it. There we go. I mean, they have an arms shop in Torino. So even kind of like this very, very small kind of state has, and I imagine even Belgium has. Let's have a look at what Belgium's got. Yeah, they have an ammunition shop, you know, and maybe in Antwerp they have an arms factory, in case they just have an ammunition shop. But we're obviously significantly larger than Belgium anyway. France, Britain, United States, Prussia, even Russia. I mean, these have got to be foregone conclusions. Let's have a look at Russia's kind of industrial. It's hard to gauge with Russia because it's spread out, but let's have a look. No, they have a kind of shipbuilding plant. Yeah, so again, they just have an arms shop. In a sense, then, you know, like our kind of industrial military complex will achieve a kind of qualitative leap forward, really. Once these factories are complete, we'll probably bypass Russia in terms of the production of military supplies and munitions, you know, which is great news. It's a really, really important step. But, you know, Constantinople is the center of significant industrial development. The next real thing that we need, the technology that I'm waiting for every single turn, is railroads. We're not there yet. We've just kind of got capital markets, which is great, which opens up the research, basically, the commodities, futures, and investments banks. But the thing that we're looking for, the qualitative engineering leap, is railroads, is the ability for our industrialists to basically build locomotives and to kind of start laying railroads. And we can't be far off that. You know, we've got significant industrial development happening, and it kind of exists almost everywhere else, all of the other major countries to the north of us. So we're the last really for this to arrive at, but it's something that's on the cards very, very soon, I think. And that would be a big qualitative leap in terms of our productive capacity. The first railroad is going to be from Constantinople to Adrianople, of course, and we're going to look to really develop the kind of tobacco belt, which is Salonika, Kavala, Adrianople, and Constantinople. And the railroad in Constantinople, of course, will dramatically increase the productive capacity of the factories there. The next railroad will be Izmit through Bursa. That'll increase opium production there, which is really good. And then into Smyrna, which is our second big industrial center. That's the kind of early kind of railroad plan, really, is to develop this kind of region. Now, talking of tobacco, we produce a surplus of tobacco once we meet domestic demand. As such, I've begun the building of, well, the development really of the last tobacco growing region of the empire, which is Plevna. I held off on that before the war because it occurred to me there was a good chance Plevna may fall, that this construction might be disrupted, and didn't really want it to lose it. I mean, generally speaking, if the Russians take something over, the industrial development there kind of continues under their guise, really. It doesn't necessarily disrupt it, but I wanted to hold off just in case. State revenue, we're not collecting at any kind of great rate at the moment. I'm sort of considering maybe kind of like for a period of time stopping this investment in percussion cut muskets. So we're at 62%. It's, you know, so it's a long way off, but it is slowing down our kind of slowing down the accumulation of state revenue, really. But then, of course, we have the increased costs of the fact that we have just kind of expanded our army fairly significantly. So I'm thinking of maybe actually just dissolving these militia divisions and really waiting for kind of, you know, it's that question, do we have a really large army, or do we have a qualitatively good army? And that is a bit of a zero-sum question for us. If we begin to kind of dissolve some of these units that we built, obviously, it does make us a little bit vulnerable, but it allows us to have more state revenue. That allows us to continue the research of percussion-cut muskets. That will be researched anyway. That will gradually be researched, but ploughing in state revenue, 50 state revenue per fortnight, does increase the speed at which that technology is researched. I think, by and large, that's it as a business report. There's nothing else significant to report. The next construction planned will be an additional tobacco plantation in northern Bulgaria. We've stopped the import of steel. We've got really, really good kind of stockpile of manufactured goods. Our manufactured goods now, we don't even have to import any. We're completely self-sufficient in manufactured goods, and also textiles. One thing that you'll notice is textiles looks like it's really declining. The reason for that, one of the ways that you gauge the economy. Let's take a look at textiles. So we've got our total kind of inventory of textiles at the moment is 34. If we kept all of those for domestic consumption, we'd actually just about be meeting demand. That means that domestic consumption is quite high. But we can meet that. We can meet that domestic consumption anyway and still export 20 units. So to that end, we're going to do that. We're going to sort of make sure that we have enough to meet domestic demand. If we sell all 9, which we will, plus any surplus we're going to be looking to export. So the reason that declines is on the basis of all of those being exported, that next turn stock will be at 11. You know, on the basis of now domestic sales are a sure enough thing. Pretty much that's the indication of what we sell every turn. You know, that will gradually increase as time goes on. But yeah, we don't actually produce much of a surplus, but we're sitting at a pretty kind of decent stockpile. So we're just trying to get rid of any kind of spare textiles that we have, and pretty much that's what I do during the war and the economy. So if we have a look at coal, we've got 50 kind of set to hold back. We've got 134. If we kind of like bring all of those back, you can see now that still our craftsmen are producing a very small amount of coal. There's a very small amount of background production in our economy for kind of guild-based production that brings our production of coal from 184 this turn to 187 next turn. What we really want to do is just to hold back a sufficient amount to ensure that, you know, like if I keep everything on 50 as well, it's a really good way of kind of seeing what's increasing. If next turn the figure on the left is like 43, then I'll look at my exports straight away. I'll look at my exports. How much coal have I exported? Oh, I've not exported any, and it's sitting at like 43. That must mean that like that basically that we're consuming more coal than we're producing. It's a really nice, easy way to indicate how much you're producing. We can see, for example, that the iron. Gradually, we are kind of beginning to shift a bit of iron. I think at some point soon we'll stop exports of iron. We want to make sure that with these kind of strategic commodities that are really important, not so much minerals, but that are really important, steel, this kind of thing, mechanical parts, we want to make sure that we've got a lot of these kind of stored in the economy. Not so much that that they're going to be kind of wasting, you know, they're going to start vanishing from warehouses, but enough that once this industrial economy really begins to kind of lock into gear, which it's going to be doing, we've built a lot of factories, they've started opening up, we're going to be building railroads soon. Those railroads consume coal and this sort of thing, you know. To build railroads, we're going to need a lot of steel, we're going to need a lot of manufactured goods, we're going to need a lot of private capital. It's an expensive thing, it takes time, but we want to make sure that we have a surplus of those things so that, you know, when we can begin to sort of quickly develop railroads. We don't want to be sitting around and waiting to kind of stockpile certain kinds of commodities to ensure that we can do that. We want to make sure that beforehand we have those commodities in place. And so it's a bit of kind of strategic planning. It's not a planned economy, really. It's a sort of, you know, it's a capitalist economy, but we're doing it on a kind of planned basis. You know, we're trying to strategically plan our economic development. That's it for March 1854. Unless there's anything that I missed, I don't think that there is. I've covered all kinds of military, all of the kind of military issues that we're facing. Obviously, the most pressing concern is the kind of bit of an emergency developing in Greece. We want to make sure that this force is made an example of. We don't want kind of Greece, the little kingdom of Greece, to get any kind of crazy ideas about what what their status is. So we're going to deal with that, stamp on that really hard and fast. And yeah, really, it's just a case of kind of. Economically, I'm just waiting on railroads, really. That's the thing that we want, and I feel like we're on a cusp. And once we're there, that's going to really kind of open up, if you like, open up the floodgates in terms of the amount of revenue that we can get, in terms of, you know, like the speed and pace of our economic development. That'll play into military things as well. You know, once we start generating a lot more kind of goods, that'll increase the amount of state revenue that we have, means that we can look at more kind of interesting military projects. And for example, at the moment we're not gaining very much state revenue, so it means that our plan, for example, to fortify Constantinople is on hold for the time being until we're in a position that we're collecting enough revenue to comfortably be able to do that. We have all the other kind of materials that we need, but not revenue. State revenue is something that we're keeping a careful eye on, but it's only 3 months after the war. You know, it's gradually climbing. That's fine. And also, state revenue doesn't, like, you don't collect it in a mechanical way like you do with other computer games. Some taxes are collected at certain times of the year. You'll be informed of that in your economic reports. So you'll get sort of, you know, like, so we consider certain kinds of taxes we collect, quarterly taxes we collected, other kinds of taxes are collected at different times, you know, so like it happens in little fits and bursts. And also we have, topping that up, conversion of sort of diamonds, of gems. That's at an appropriate enough level that it's not increasing, you know, it's not putting any strain on kind of the value of our currency. It's just about enough that it's topping up our state revenue, but not generating inflation, which is good. We're going to keep an eye on that. That's all for now. The next report then is going to be in 3 months' time. Will be sort of either early or late June, or maybe early July. It'll be around that time, 1854. We can look at the developments of the kind of the second quarter of the year, and we'll obviously have a look at how this Epirus situation has developed, and what other economic and technological developments we'll be enjoying by then. So thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.